Hello, let's talk about the test panel in Volumator. So here we can test areas for volume coverage to make sure that the volume is reaching out into all those extremities and that it's covering the area correctly. We can run a tester after we've built a volume to make sure that the volume is accurately representing the space, but also maybe the world has changed, the geometry has moved, and now the volume is no longer fitting the space correctly. And so it will give you really good feedback on this. Now, much like the build panel, we have piloting in drone modes, and it uses the same detection method to fire out rays, and then it will check to see whether or not each of these rays are inside a volume class of your choosing. So let's quickly build a volume here. Okay, now we can already see from the quick test that we've got a couple of points here, but let's clean this up, and we're going to fly around in piloting mode and see if we can find anything manually. And as usual, we'll see the red detection rays coming out, and we're trying to find any spots. And you can see here that it detected one, and it's updated the status bar here to tell us that we found one warning, and we might be able to find some more right in the little crevices here. We've done a pretty good job. And yep, it looks like we've only got the one warning, no errors. And you can see it's just shown a little sprite here that tells us where the warnings are. Now, if I was to move the volume like this, and so now we have areas here that are outside of the volume, we'll start it again. And immediately we're seeing a ton of warnings and errors here. Now, if I stop testing, you can see that we've got 60 warnings and 30 errors. Let's stop. And you can see we've got a ton of sprites here telling us where all the problems are. Now, you'll notice that they have slightly different indicators here. So the small x is a warning. That means that there's a space that's colliding with geometry that is not inside of the volume. And then the big x's are errors, which means that it's in open space. Now, obviously, errors are more serious because it's more likely that it would be a problem for you because you could maybe get the camera in here, or it's just more accessible generally. So these warnings may not actually be problems depending on your use case. If we find it difficult, let's say we're in a really large map and we don't know where they are, we can just teleport to them and scroll through them like this. And because many of these could be in geometry itself, it can sometimes be challenging to get a good camera angle. Volumator tries to get a half-decent camera angle on it, but it's not always possible. And that's why we also have the little debug sphere that pops up here, so you can always see it, regardless of the geometry getting in the way of the camera. And then likewise, we can jump to errors here as well. And as you can see, these are all in open space, so they're usually more important to investigate. So what is it we actually can do with this test data? Well, I've got a volume here that has a few little warnings on it. We can see some here. And if you ever want to actually see it clearer, you can show selected with the volume selected, and it will highlight the issues in the map here with the volume that you have selected. But using this data, we can actually edit the volume. There's a video on the edit panel here, but just to very quickly show you how you can do this, if we go to show selected again, and really quickly here, we can see the errors. This is the top-down view and the volume here. And so we go to edit vertices on the volume and then move the points so that they now cover the shape. We hit commit, and there we go. All of our errors have gone, and our volume is now perfect with 0 errors and warnings. So we've covered warnings and errors, but what about multi-volumes? So there may be cases where you want to have exclusive volumes in different areas, so no overlapping volumes. And in those cases, we want to be able to test for multi-volumes. Now, this is a more complicated test because every detection ray has to run through every single volume of the same class in the map, which is why it's off by default. But if you do want to do it, you just have to enable multi-volume test in the tester settings. And now when you run one of these two tests here, every detection ray will be checking not just whether or not it's got a volume in it, but if there's an overlapping volume. And so in this example here, we've got 2 volumes. And as you can see, one is overlapping another because it's cut this corner off here. And let's say we were using these volumes in a case where we wanted exclusive volumes, so only ever one volume at a time. This could be a problem. So we'd want to know about this. It's pretty obvious here in this test map, but in a real world game, it can be quite difficult to tell when you've got overlapping volumes. And so this is where testers can be really helpful to understand whether or not you have a problem. So now with multi-volume testing enabled, let's just start piloting, and immediately we can see extra points showing up. And we'll also notice that the status update is now including multi-volume errors. And when we feel like we've done enough, we hit the stop. And you can see these have a different sprite on them. And this indicates that this is an area that's been detected that has an overlapping volume. And so if we come here, we can see quite clearly the outline of the shape. And if we come to the top orthographic view, it becomes even clearer. It's worth noting that tester sprites are limited by the same min point distance that the building is as well, which is why we only see one line of it here and then it gets more here. So if you want more fidelity in your testing, you can decrease this and you'll get way, way more. In fact, let's try that now. And immediately we can see that there are a lot more errors now than we had previously. So if you need really detailed testing data, lower the min point distance before you do your tests. Okay, let's talk about geometry changes in this last issue type here. So the great thing about this test type is that it's testing to see if anything in the world has changed. So the way it works is that it uses the data stored in the Volumator data component to check to see if things that were previously colliding when we built the volume are still colliding now. And this will tell you if something in the world has changed. So as an example, if I run this test here, it will tell us nothing has changed. Okay, everything's fine. And that's because I've literally just built this volume. But if I was to say, move this wall here, now the detection points that were detected here colliding with the wall are now no longer colliding with anything. So when I click this, all of these were the detection points that were previously detecting collisions that are no longer detecting things. So this can easily tell you if something in the map has changed. Now, it's not going to tell you the whole picture, but it's going to tell you that it's worth looking at this and it's worth checking to see if something has changed and you need to rebuild the volume. And the great thing about this, of course, is just like with the other issue types, we can teleport between them. So in a busy map, you can come in and just select your volumes, run the geometry change test, and then skip between the points just to check to see if there's anything suspicious. Because it uses the detection data stored in the Volumator data component, obviously it won't work on anything it doesn't have one of these components. And it also can't run on piloting and drones because it's using historical data and checking it with current geometry. So that's why it's a separate test that's run here. But it's also run, if you do a quick test, it will actually run it here because the quick test runs on the volume that you have selected. So let's just quickly talk about the difference between these two testers here and the quick test that's run in the toolbar. So when you run one of these two testers here, you're generating new detection data and you're scanning the area for any volume of the current volume class to see if there's any volume in there. Or, of course, if you're running multi-volume tests, you're checking for overlaps. Now, the difference between that and a quick test, or in fact, actually this, which is a cut-down version of a quick test, with the quick test, we check the detection data that's stored in the volumes data component, and we use that as the testing data. So the main difference there is that a quick test is good to check for the general integrity of the volume. Is the volume still covering the detected locations? Whereas when we run a full test, we're actually properly getting in there and generating new test data. So pilot and drone tests are more thorough and extensive, whereas a quick test is better to check the integrity of the volume, but with the additional benefit of the geometry changes, which is still using the detected data, but it's checking to see if it's still colliding with the object that it was previously. Whereas if we did a proper test, the difference here is that we're now detecting the actual area rather than the volume. So that's the main difference. And the last thing to mention about quick tests is that you do get a couple of additional things. We already talked about geo changes. We get feedback on overlaps. While we don't do multi-volume tests on quick tests because you're testing an individual volume, what you can do is tell if it is overlapping with any other volume. So for example, I've got two volumes of the same type here, press quick test, and now it's telling you that it's overlapping with some other volume. It won't tell you where it is, and you'd have to do one of these tests with multi-volume on to see exactly where the overlap is, but at least you can tell, yes, it is overlapping with something. So that's handy. And lastly, we can see that the location has or has not changed. So this one hasn't changed, whereas this one has been moved. And that's obviously the cause of all the errors here. The only other thing about tests is that depot tests are slightly different in that they're testing for a specific volume rather than any volume of the same class. But go check out the video on Automate and I'll cover it in there. Thanks.